questions with interest.
We've had a pretty devastating critique on all sides of this document in the course of this debate. It was initiated by the previous government. The revision was initiated by the previous government with a view to promoting a thriving modern port sector, but it's emerged under this government really as something of a damp squib. Even the minister doesn't seem to think that he has much content. I listened to his speech carefully, and he delivered the preamble to the speech very well, telling us all about the procedural history of the document, including even the dates on which the Select Committee and the other place had taken evidence. I was expecting him to go on then and tell us about what the document actually said, what the main changes were that it was going to make and how it was going to achieve the government's growth agenda, but he just sat down at that point. And that is because the document seems wholly inadequate to the challenges and to the opportunities. My noble friend Lord Moylan spoke about the grid connections and the need for increasing those. The noble Lady Scott of Needham Market spoke about rail and road connectivity and other matters of that sort. I'm not summarising the whole debate, but my noble friends Lord Mount Evans and Lord Fuller added devastatingly to her critique, and on the basis of very considerable knowledge. And my noble friend Lady Maclean of Redditch pointed out that the NPS lives in a sort of parallel universe with no connection to the government's planning and infrastructure bill that we're debating in a different forum at this very moment, we know from day to day in the course of this week. So it doesn't seem to do the job. My lords, ports are central to the economy of this country. They handle the overwhelming majority of our trade. They act as gateways for energy and manufacturing and provide employment and opportunities in coastal communities. They're strategic national infrastructure without which growth, resilience and security cannot be delivered. What marks out the United Kingdom port sector is the environment in which it operates. It is unsubsidised, competitive and dynamic. Well, reasonably dynamic, if one believes what my noble friend Lord Fuller said. Perhaps some parts of it need a bit of shaking up. When a port expands or develops a new terminal or invests in technology, it does so with private capital and at its own risk. And this means that the framework set by the government must not disincentivise investment. Now, we support that approach to the provision of ports in this country. We don't want to go back to the disaster of nationalised ports, and the mention of the dock labour scheme reminds one, by the noble Lord Greenway, reminds one of the horrors that existed on those occasions. But to be successful and to invest, the ports have to need to have some sort of certainty. And the current planning system is frankly far too complex. Ports have to navigate local planning authorities, marine licensing regimes, environmental regulators, in some cases the national infrastructure planning process. The result is fragmentation, duplication and delay. We could look to a document like this to start removing those problems, but it does nothing. It changes nothing at all of any real significance. Time and again, applicants face the uncertainty of competing judgments from different authorities. This is no small matter. Every delay in planning ties up capital, weakens competitiveness, and deters future proposals. In a sector where operators already carry full commercial risk, that uncertainty is corrosive. If an operator is prepared to risk its own capital within the bounds of environmental and safety law, that willingness should be taken as compelling evidence of need. That principle is acknowledged in the draft statement, but it must be made stronger and clearer. Forecasts have a role in setting context, but they must never be allowed to become shackles that allow the planning system to be used to constrain investment. The draft statement includes national freight forecasts. As background, they're useful, but they're no more useful than anybody else who commissioned national freight forecasts from a reputable body. There's nothing particularly insightful about them simply because they're published by the government. But they mustn't be allowed to become constraints, and to treat them as binding in some ways would be to undermine the very responsiveness that has been a defining feature of the port sector in this country. Somebody a moment ago, and forgive me if I forget which noble lord it was who said it, said that in order to have competition, you actually have to have some surplus capacity. And so tying the system to forecasts would be fatal in that regard. Ports operate in fast-moving competitive markets. They must be able to respond to emerging opportunities, hydrogen, carbon shipping and storage, offshore renewables, international redistribution, but also they must continue simply to feed us and provide us with the goods that we depend on day to day. All these wonderful things, these environmental things, these green things, they're very important. But we fundamentally depend, 40% of our food is imported into this country, and a lot of it comes on ships. And a lot of other heavy goods as well, in particular, that come here. They can't be captured adequately on backward-looking models, this sort of forecast. If every scheme is required to prove its case against centrally produced forecasts, we will miss opportunities that are vital to the future of the economy. The draft statement does acknowledge that it is for each port to take its own commercial view of demand and to bear its own risks. That's the correct principle, and it must be reinforced clearly throughout the final document. Building capacity and resilience ahead of demand is not speculative extravagance. It is a strategic necessity if the UK is to withstand shocks to supply chains, maintain competitiveness. And I must say I was horrified by the figures quoted by my noble friend Lord Fuller in terms of the cost of landing goods at different ports in this country compared to what is a really serious major port just across the North Sea facing us, or network of ports across the North Sea facing us. So we come then to energy. Ports stand ready to enable cleaner growth through shore power, electrification and new fuels, but they can't do this while electricity prices in the United Kingdom remain among the highest in Europe. Not among the highest in Europe, are the highest in Europe, driven in part by layers of environmental regulations. Nor can they deliver if grid connections are delayed year after year. My lords, the outcome is perverse, a policy environment that speaks of net zero with urgency, but in practice deters the very investment needed to achieve it. So I put three questions to the Minister. First, will he confirm that the forecasts in the final statement will be contextual only and not determinative, and not taken by the planning system as being determinative, and that promoters will be free to take their own view of need? Secondly, what steps will the government take to bring down electricity costs and accelerate grid connections so that ports can invest in green infrastructure rather than being held back by policy-driven costs? And thirdly, how does, I'm going to quote here, so if you forgive me a second, how does this document fit in with the Chancellor's ambition, which he stated in a written statement on the 17th of March this year, to reset the UK's regulatory landscape and achieve this vision? The government will implement a package of reforms over this Parliament, that focus on, one of them, tackling complexity and reducing the burden of regulation, including the government committing to reducing the administrative costs of regulation for businesses by 25% by the end of this Parliament. Is the port sector going to benefit from that pledge? And why does it not appear in this document as a driving consideration? My Lord, the port sector needs a framework that provides clarity, consistency, and proportion. If the national policy statement delivers these qualities, ports will invest boldly, they will innovate, and they will support the growth and resilience this country needs. But if the statement leaves ambiguity, if it lacks ambition, if it constrains investments, or if it piles systemic obligations onto individual schemes, then we will deter the very capital on which future prosperity depends. Looked at as a narrow planning document, this might just work, but as a vision of the port system that we want to see in this country, it fails systematically and comprehensively. I don't think I'm going too far in saying that the tenor of the debate we have had today is that really the government should take this away and start again and come back with something which sets a real vision for ports that will serve us well into the future.
Yeah.